Thanks, Jennifer. So I know you got sort of a brief introduction, but I wanted to give everyone in the group a chance to tell you just a little bit more about themselves and why they've joined into this project. So we are here because of our work with the Toolkit for Disability Equity, which is sponsored by C4DISC, and it's something we've been working on for about a year. Simon, do you want to kick us off with a quick intro?
Hi everybody, my name's Simon Holt. I'm based in Oxford in the UK. I work with Elsevier. I've got lived experience of disability as I'm a blind person, and my aim for this toolkit is just that it helps everybody to fulfill their potential, whether they're a student or they're working or learning or whatever it is.
Sylvia?
Sure. I'm Sylvia Itzo-Hunter. I work for Wiley Partner Solutions, and I live in Toronto, in Canada. I am interested in this project because I am a person with a disability. Specifically, I live with depression and anxiety, and also because I have a wide variety of folks with disabilities / disabled folks in my family and friend group.
Erin, you're up next.
Great. I'm Erin. I work with Wiley as well, and my lived experience of disability is that I have a spinal cord injury, and so I'm very eager that this toolkit will help disabled employees get the best out of their employment in the scholarly communications industry.
And I'm Karen. I'm at Indiana University Libraries. I am also a person with a disability. I'm autistic and have lots of family and friends who are also folks with disabilities. I'm going to share my screen here. And I've got just a short presentation for all of you. A quick note that I just wanted to mention, as you've probably already heard from each of us talking about it, just on language, that you'll probably hear us switch back and forth between using the phrase disabled people and the phrase people with disabilities. We work with a pretty large group of folks, all of whom have different preferences on that language. Our recommendation is generally to use the term that folks ask you to use for them. But in this case, we tend to sort of go back and forth because everyone uses different language. So why the Toolkit for Disability Equity? So I wanted to tell you a little bit about why we think this project is important. Some basic statistics: we have about 15% of the global population has a disability. That's over 1 billion people. According to the UN, however, using their definition of developed countries, the unemployment rate for disabled people is twice that of those of working age who are not disabled. In other words, we are seriously underemployed. So our goal is not only to help those who are currently working in the ScholComm field, but also to impact and create change in workplace cultures, inviting further participation in our work and in our industries from those with disabilities. As Simon often reminds us, people with disabilities live in a world that was not built with them in mind. We navigate barriers that are often invisible to others. And because of that, many of us end up becoming excellent problem solvers and life hackers by simple necessity. These are just the kinds of people that I personally enjoy working with. So what is it? So this project started over a year ago at this point. It was begun by a small group of people who called themselves Publishing Enabled. They all worked in the ScholComm industry, and they were all active around issues of disability. This group approached C4DISC, which is the Coalition for Diversity and Inclusion in Scholarly Communication, and approached them about becoming part of their Toolkit series. And this group now forms what is the steering committee of our Toolkit for Disability Equity. We are also working with PubPub, who offered their participation as a host for the toolkit. And over the past year, that sort of original concept, that original idea has expanded to include over 30 volunteers from multiple countries and from multiple parts of the scholarly communication industry. The toolkit itself is envisioned as containing practical tools for use. It's intended to be dynamic, changing with the times, with multiple entry points for users to reach the information that they need when they need it. Importantly, in terms of scope, it's ScholComm specific. So we're interested in particular on needs relevant to people working in or interested in the scholarly communication field, whether that's in libraries, in publishers, with vendors, elsewhere, that sort of thing. Finally, while our audience does include both potential and current employees with disabilities, employers and organizations, and allies, it was really important to us that we highlight first being of service to other people with disabilities. And we've found, for example, that many resources are intended for use by employers, by potential allies, as opposed to being in service of people with disabilities. So one of our first steps, once we had gathered a sort of larger volunteer group, was to think about what the mission and the goals were of this project. I'm not going to read out this entire slide, but I promise I'm going to share we will share all of this afterwards, so you can have access to this. This is also on the PubPub toolkit, which we're going to show you shortly. In general, however, our primary goals are to raise awareness, educate, and importantly, to build community. So I want to give you just a quick intro to the toolkit itself, and please let me know if the sound isn't working.
Welcome to the Scholarly Communications Disability Equity Toolkit. 1 in 7 people have a disability. So if it's not you, it's someone you work with. Our toolkit is for everyone involved in scholarly communications. It'll help you be more informed and more disability inclusive. To bring us all together, to share and to learn. Because no question is too small or too basic. If you're asking it, someone else is thinking it.
All right, and now I'm going to turn it over to Erin.
Hello. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where we are currently with the toolkit. I'll show you the toolkit, and then we'll talk a little bit about where we want to go next. So to think about where we are now, at the moment, the toolkit has a welcome, an introduction, and the video that you've just seen. There's also a series of frequently asked questions. So these are common questions, case studies, examples, and links to further reading. These are particularly focused on disabled people. So for example, I have a disability, how do I ask for accommodations? And the examples are specifically tailored to the scholarly communications industry. So we've tried to make this as practical and applicable as we can. The resources are existing links that the steering group has curated. It's very difficult to say, apparently. And we've gathered these links, we've vetted them to make sure that the information is accurate and applicable, and hosted them on the site. So at the moment, I'll show you if I can. I'm going to try and share my screen, and I will. Nearly there. Let me know if you can see that. Great. So this is what it looks like at the moment. This is the video that you've just seen. and then leading into different sections. So you'll see there's a number of different frequently asked questions. And here's a common one, which is just how should I disclose my disability? So there's a summary of potential next steps that a disabled employee could take. There is a use case. So this is a more clear example of what this might look like in practice. And then some additional resources at the bottom. Going back then, we also have a couple of resources pages. So here you'll find things like just where to start. If you have no idea where to start with disability inclusion in your organization or as a disability ally, this is a great place to begin that journey. We have some information on defining disability, some language guidance. I know that that's one that comes up pretty frequently, and Karen mentioned at the start the question of disabled people versus people with disabilities. That is something that is covered here. There's fairly comprehensive guides here. There's also quite a lot of information about accessibility standards. There's a lot of great work that's been done in that area, so we wanted to summarize it and make sure that people had a quick way to find that information. And then there's just a quick note about the limitations of the toolkit. And additionally, we have some further reading. So this is kind of a staff picks. This was a fun one where people picked some of their favorite disability resources, books. I think there's a video in there as well. So there's a little bit of everything if you're just looking to read more and learn more about disability. So I will stop sharing the toolkit. Karen, do you want to share the slides again, or do you want me to take over?
You can go ahead. I'm setting up breakout.
Okay. Excellent. That's perfect. Let me just share my screen again. And okay, I think okay, here we go. And let me know if you can see that. Any luck?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay,
Looks
great.
good.
Perfect. Thank you. So this is where we're planning to move in the future. We have a lot of volunteers. They've done a lot of great work getting us to where we are. And the next step is, you'll see, obviously, there's the existing resources there, and then there's the things that we're going to be adding. So that frequently asked questions section is going to be expanded outwards so that it will focus on not just disabled employees, but also coworkers, managers, organizations that maybe don't have an HR function and don't have the capabilities to handle disability accommodations requests at the moment, but would like to do that. All of that kind of thing will have a very robust frequently asked questions section. Similarly, we'll have some content that's focused on the employment life cycle. So as a disabled person, how do you handle job interviews, that kind of thing. And also different roles that are common within the publishing industry. So content that's maybe more applicable to attending conferences, people who work in editorial, etc. We're also very keen to spin up a community segment of this. We haven't quite decided the format yet, but I noticed that that was one of the comments that came up earlier. That's definitely something that we're very eager to incorporate. So if you have any ideas or experience in that area, please do share. We're always looking for new ideas and new ways to do things. So there's a lot of great content coming. And then the other thing that we're very conscious of is governance and how to take this forward in a sustainable way and make sure that the toolkit is living on for a very long time. Because as mentioned earlier, disability is an always changing subject. Legislation changes, guidelines change, all of that kind of thing. And we want to make sure that the toolkit is always reflecting the newest state of knowledge. So we're planning to spool up another group that will take this forward. At the moment, we have a steering group that has dedicated a lot of time and effort to this, but not all of us have day jobs and not all of us can do this forever. So it's all about making sure that we have a really solid plan for taking this forward into the future. So I will, while Karen is getting us into groups, these are the questions that we'll be discussing in the groups, so please feel free to look over these. But are there any questions about the toolkit and what we've just covered before we split out into the groups?
Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. thank you for coming back. Thank you for hopefully what was a really fruitful and enjoyable conversation. We're just going to spend a few minutes now just hearing some quick summaries from each group in terms of, you know, what was said and kind of the main takeaways. And then we're going to wrap up. And if we're lucky, there might even be time for another question. So I'm going to go through each group in turn, and hopefully somebody will be able to summarize. So first of all, Karen, can I start with you or somebody from your group, please?
Yeah, and I forgot to ask if someone wanted to report out. And then even though I'm the one that clicked the button for breakout rooms, I didn't realize we were getting kicked back, because that's how it goes. So I'm just going to report out. So we managed to hit all 4 questions, although we only had like 2 minutes at the end for the last one. I think what was really interesting is, you know, we talked first about how would you use this resource, and I think a lot of what actually got surfaced there was how many folks were expecting us to talk about accessibility, right, like accessible PDFs and things like that. So that was I don't think anyone was disappointed, I will say, but I think that was the sort of talk they were expecting. So we talked about that a little bit. Sustainability, we mostly talked about how C4 Disc should just make it an ongoing committee, which I think is the sort of direction we're heading anyway. Community, there were a couple of parallel recommendations. So for example, someone in our group mentioned this Trans LAS network, which has like a Discord, and that might be a model that we could look at for sort of an ongoing private community. And content, that we had a lot of folks who were interested in just some lists of different kinds of assistive technologies, either with or without recommendations, but just sort of being able to know what's out there. I think that's
great. Yeah, that's brilliant. The second group was my group. Priscilla, you took some notes. Did you want to summarize, or would you like me to? I don't mind.
I'm happy to summarize.
That would be great if that's all
yeah,
right.
Yeah, and if you have anything to add, Simon, please feel free to do that as well.
I think ours was an altogether more free-form discussion,
yeah.
wasn't it? Right?
Just a little bit, but that's okay.
Yeah.
I think what I kind of thought as a whole from the group is that folks are actually pretty excited about the ways in which the toolkit addresses those kind of behavioral issues within the workplace. I saw a lot of folks be interested in including like a reading group tool for in their workplace in order to kind of just like stir up that conversation or incorporate it within their DEI curriculum. You know, there were some interesting comments about, you know, how folks are dealing with a lot of maybe mental health issues and how folks may start more and more identifying with the term disabled as, you know, we move forward in this kind of, you know, I use quotations, you know, in some cases like post-pandemic world. And what does that really mean, and how to deal with that both in the workspace, but also in the home environment as well. And then a really interesting comment from Amy. Don't mean to call you out, Amy, but I thought it was really interesting. But just talking as well about how to kind of create sustainable workflows to address accessibility related challenges, but not accessibility, but also like behavioral challenges amongst folks who serve on volunteer editorial boards for journals. And I'm thinking even student journals in this case. I also work for a library, and I have encountered those issues in the past. So I thought that was really cool. But yeah, I think there was a lot of really interesting discussion on the behavioral aspects of the toolkit. I myself had this like discussion about, you know, content accessibility and trying to drive up interest and understanding of content accessibility within my own workplace. But, you know, there's also that addressing that behavioral challenge as well that we discussed. So yeah, hopefully that summarizes things. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, that was great and really comprehensive. Sylvia, can we move on to your group, please?
Sure. So Teresa, you took some notes. Did you want to report out or did you want me to?
No, I can do it. That's fine.
Awesome. Please go ahead.
So we talked about how ideally there would be like an online forum of some place, and how maybe there would be an option for people to submit at least semi-anonymous questions so that if they're not comfortable outing themselves or if they have a specific situation at work they're looking for advice for. And that seemed to get a lot of support from several people in the group. So that was really positive thing. We talked a little bit about what role does C4Disc currently play, and what role they might play in the future, because it does seem like, you know, like C4, this group is part of C4Disc, but they operate a little bit differently. It was a group of people that came to C4Disc with support for it. So there is a place for C4Disc, but it's not like this is just like a committee of C4Disc. Like they're still looking for, like they kind of, and there was talk about other groups that have done something similar, like RDAP and UIPO, where they started out with a bigger organization, and but they're still kind of like their own little unit in that organization that's still kind of semi-separate. And in some of those situations, they actually did eventually formally break away from the bigger group. And so maybe those are some organizations that could be looked to for examples. Oh, there was also talk about multiple modalities in whatever community there is. So, you know, like having like a Discord channel, that's great. But maybe if that's not really something that's accessible to you, or is at least just easily accessible, maybe also having like monthly live chats, like how the Open Con librarian community has it, so that people are able to interact in different modalities. Making sure that this is a group that's for everyone. Obviously, there's a focus on disabled people, but you know, for allies as well. Also, like just making sure that for people who maybe are not currently disabled but are disabled in the future, that they are aware of it and they know there's a resource to go to for help. I think that's about it. We mostly focus on the third question.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and I think certainly the thing about interaction and forums and discords and stuff, it's something we've talked about a lot in our group, and it's something I think we're keen to explore how to do it in a way that's easily maintainable, thinking about moderation and stuff like that, but also making sure that we're actually showing community, because there's nothing that shows a lack of community more than a forum that nobody posts on, right? So, you know, there's a lot of different ways to think about that, I think. Finally, Erin, how about your group?
So I have tried to organize this into some broad themes. So we'll see how I do. I think one of the things that really struck me was the idea of this being a really broad umbrella or a broad church, where both in terms of what is disability, so the idea of it including mental health, including neurodivergence, including a lot of different, you know, intersections of identity, but also in terms of the audience. So libraries, universities, researchers, you know, really kind of trying to make sure that we're not diluting the overall message or the overall purpose of the toolkit, but also making it as useful to as wide a group as possible. So that was really an interesting and helpful conversation. I think also community was one that came up for us as well. We talked a little bit about how helpful it is just to know that other people are going through the same things, just being able to connect with other people on that level, particularly where it can be difficult to disclose a disability in the workplace and you feel like you're kind of hiding a part of yourself. And then on the kind of more practical front, we had the ideas of looking at a wiki style of updating the PubPub, which I thought was a really helpful and potentially quite cool suggestion that we should look more into. And also the idea of accessibility came up for us as well, but maybe from a bit more of a practical point of view of like, there are certain segments like university presses that are really dying for this information. So as much as we can do around that, signpost that information outwards, you know, the better.
That sounds great. I think we have time for probably one question before I wrap up. Does anybody have something they'd like to ask?